There is a moment at the end of each day that most people waste completely. They close their eyes without thinking about what left their hands, without knowing where things stand, without doing anything that might have mattered. Across centuries and across very different cultures, that moment, the quiet hour before sleep, was treated with unusual seriousness when it came to money, not because of superstition, because of something far more practical and far more psychologically honest. The night changes things. What you carry into sleep has a way of settling into habit. What you close your eyes holding tends to stay. Old households understood this. They had practices around it, rituals that on the surface looked simple, but beneath the surface, each one encoded a discipline, a relationship with money, and a kind of protection that the modern world stopped teaching a long time ago. This is about those practices, and about why doing nothing before bed, when it comes to money, may cost you far more than you realize. In ancient Jewish household tradition, there is a concept woven through daily life called cheshbon ha-nefesh, an accounting of the soul. The idea is old and layered with meaning. At its core, it asks something simple. Before you rest, take inventory, not of your feelings, of your actions. For families who carried this practice seriously across generations, the financial dimension of that accounting was not separate from the spiritual one. Money, how it moved, how it was earned, how it was spent, how it was treated, was considered a reflection of inner order. To close the day without that accounting was to go to sleep in a state of fog. And fog, those households believed, was where losses hid. It wasn't unique to one tradition. In various Mediterranean household cultures, particularly those in Greece and among old Italian and Sephardic families, there were evening customs tied to the home's financial life. Merchants would close their ledgers with small, deliberate acts. Some would count what remained. Some would put away what was earmarked for the next day. Some would speak quietly about the day's transactions, not to complain, but to close them consciously, to tell the day that it was finished, and nothing would follow it into the night. The night was not passive in these households. It was transitional, a threshold. And thresholds in almost every old tradition required a moment of attention. What you left open at night, a debt unacknowledged, a loss unexamined, a careless habit unnamed, had a tendency to grow. This is not mysticism. It's how the human mind actually works. There is a widespread belief, found in Ashkenazi Jewish custom, in some South Asian folk traditions, and scattered through Mediterranean superstition, that you should not count money after dark. The specific timing varies, the reasoning varies, but the core warning appears in too many places to be dismissed. At first it sounds like pure folk belief, a rule invented by grandmothers to keep children from obsessing over coins at night. But sit with it longer, and something else emerges. Counting money when the working day is over, when markets are closed, when there is nothing productive that can result from the count. That kind of counting tends to become a different thing entirely. It becomes anxious measuring. It becomes the restless checking of someone who does not trust what they have. It becomes a relationship with money based not on stewardship, but on fear. Old families who passed down this rule were not saying that money was sacred or untouchable at night. They were saying, do not let your relationship with money become one of anxiety. In Vedic household practice, there is a parallel idea tied to Lakshmi, the symbolic force of prosperity. One of the most deeply embedded folk teachings around this tradition is that Lakshmi does not stay where she is greeted by agitation, disorder, or grasping. The nighttime checking of money, when done from a place of worry, was seen as exactly that, an agitated relationship, a restless grasping that drove the energy of abundance away. Whether you take that symbolically or literally, the psychology is sound. People who lie awake, calculating what they have and what they owe, adding and subtracting in the dark, tend to make worse financial decisions by morning than those who close the day deliberately and rest. What you do before sleep shapes what your mind processes while you sleep. Carry anxiety into bed, and your mind spends the night in anxiety. Carry resolution, even imperfect resolution, and your mind begins to settle around it. The ancient practice was not about believing in magic. It was about managing the only financial tool that matters most, the quality of your judgment. There were households across Sephardic Jewish tradition, across certain monastic European customs, and in some old Chinese merchant families where three things were always handled before sleep, without exception. The first was the wallet, not just setting it down, actually tending to it. Old households treated the wallet, the purse, or the money container as something alive in a symbolic sense. It represented the current state of one's financial life. To leave it crumpled in a pocket, thrown on a surface, stuffed with receipts and forgotten, that was understood as a kind of neglect, not because the wallet had feelings, because of what the habit said about your relationship with what it held. In Chinese merchant tradition, there are well-documented customs around the placement and care of a wallet or money pouch at night. It was to be placed in a specific location, often elevated, away from the floor, away from shoes, away from trash. The floor was associated with neglect and trampling. Shoes carried the energy of the street, of everywhere, of disorder. Trash was decay. Where you placed your money at night was understood as a statement of how you valued it. The second was unresolved small debts. Not large financial decisions, those required time and counsel, but small debts. A borrowed sum not yet repaid, a small amount owed to a vendor or a neighbor. These were not meant to be carried into sleep if they could be closed. In Mediterranean household culture, there was a quiet moral pressure around this. A family known to let small debts drift was a family losing its financial character. And financial character, those cultures believed, was the actual foundation of prosperity. The third was the day's financial memory, what came in, what went out, not obsessively, not with judgment, just as a form of awareness. Old merchants kept small ledgers. Some families used spoken rituals at the end of the day, a brief accounting shared between spouses or spoken alone, not a worry session, a closing act, a deliberate statement that said, "I know what happened today. I will not pretend it didn't." This matters more than it sounds. Most people go to sleep with financial fog, a vague, unexamined sense of what they spent, what they earned, what they let slip through their hands. That fog accumulates. Over weeks, it becomes a complete disconnection from financial reality. And disconnection is one of the most reliable pathways to financial deterioration. Across these traditions, when you strip away the specific cultural forms, the core practice looks something like this. Find a moment, not long, 10 minutes at most, before you sleep. Close the day's financial ledger, even if only in your mind. What came in today? What left your hands? Was anything wasted that needn't have been? Was there anything borrowed or owed that should be addressed? Tend to your wallet, your purse, your money. Remove receipts and trash. Place it deliberately somewhere clean and elevated. Not on the floor, not near your shoes, not thrown in a corner. This is not ceremony for ceremony's sake. It is a physical act that reinforces a mental posture. If you carry financial worry, notice it. Name it specifically. Vague anxiety is harder to solve than a named problem. The elder families knew this. They would name the worry, a specific debt, a specific concern, and then deliberately set it aside for the morning, not in denial, with intention. Sleep is not the time to solve financial problems, but the mind needs permission to stop trying. Then close the day. In some households, this closing was spoken, a brief intention, a quiet acknowledgement that the day was done and the night was for rest. Not dramatic, not religious in a formal sense, unless the family chose to make it so, just deliberate. In Zen-influenced Japanese household custom, there is a quality called kansha, gratitude that is not sentimental but clear-eyed. Some households practiced a version of this at the end of the day, a simple acknowledgement of what they had, without comparison, without complaint, without dramatizing either abundance or lack, just a still, clear moment of seeing what was. That kind of seeing, calm, undramatic, honest, was understood to cultivate the conditions for prosperity, not because wishing made things appear, because the household that knew exactly where it stood and treated that knowledge with respect rather than anxiety was a household that made consistently better decisions over time. There is one more layer to this that several traditions address, and it is perhaps the most consistently repeated. Money, or objects strongly associated with financial stress, loss, or instability, should not be in the sleeping space if it can be avoided. In Feng Shui tradition, the bedroom is specifically protected as a space of rest and restoration. The presence of work documents, financial statements, bills, and unpaid invoices in the bedroom is understood to contaminate that space with the energy of unresolved obligation. The bedroom is not where financial problems should be stored. They should live in a different room. The desk, the office, the kitchen, somewhere that is associated with active engagement, not with rest. This is not unique to Chinese tradition. In certain monastic European households, where finances were managed with great discipline, the sleeping quarters were deliberately kept separate from financial work. Not because the monks couldn't think about money in bed, but because the habits of the mind are shaped by environment. To surround yourself with financial tension as you fall asleep is to train your mind to associate rest with unease. Bills on the nightstand, a laptop open to your bank statement, a stack of receipts on the dresser. These seem harmless, but they create a subtle, persistent background of financial pressure that the mind cannot fully release. Remove them from the sleeping space. Put them where they belong, in the place where you deal with them, at the time when you deal with them. This too is part of the practice. This is worth saying plainly. The reason most people don't have any nighttime practice around money is not that they decided it was unimportant. It's that nobody taught them. The generation before them didn't teach them. The generation before that had started to let the practices slip. There was a long period during which the practical household wisdom of old families, the real knowledge, the behavioral codes, the small rituals that actually shaped financial life, was gradually replaced by financial advice that was abstract, product-based, and disconnected from daily behavior. You were told to invest wisely, to diversify, to think about retirement. Nobody told you how to tend to your wallet before bed. Nobody told you that the state of your mind when you fall asleep shapes the state of your judgment when you wake. Nobody told you that the small habits around money, the invisible ones, the ones that seem too simple to matter, are often the ones that determine everything. Old families knew this differently. They did not make a separation between the symbolic and the practical. The way you treated your money every day was the way you related to it. And the way you related to it shaped everything, what came in, what stayed, what left. The bedtime practice was never just a ritual. It was a form of financial character, performed so many times that it became unconscious. And when something becomes unconscious, it becomes who you are. Let's be specific about what this practice actually protects. It protects your awareness. People who close the financial day consciously, who know what happened, what was spent, what was earned, make better decisions the next day. Not perfectly, but better. Awareness, maintained daily, is a form of discipline that compounds over time. Its absence, also compounding, is one of the quietest drivers of financial deterioration. It protects your relationship with money from anxiety. The anxious checker, the person who lies awake, recalculating the same numbers without resolution, trains themselves to relate to money as a source of dread. That relationship has consequences. People who dread money avoid engaging with it clearly. They make impulsive decisions. They defer things that need attention. They let fog grow because clarity is too uncomfortable. The nighttime practice interrupts that cycle. It also protects the physical space of rest. A bedroom saturated with financial anxiety is not a room where the mind fully recovers. And a mind that doesn't fully recover makes worse decisions about everything, including money. And finally, it protects something less tangible, but no less real: the moral posture of the household around money. Old families believed, and there is real truth in this, that prosperity did not come only to those who worked hard. It came to those who worked hard and who maintained the right relationship with what they earned and held. That relationship was cultivated in small, daily acts. The nighttime practice was one of the most consistent. There is something that happens when this practice is done consistently, over weeks, over months. It changes how you begin the day as much as how you end it. People who close their financial day with clarity tend to open the next day with a different quality of attention. They are not waking up into fog. They are waking up into a known position. They know where they left things. They know what needs attention. The morning doesn't begin with anxiety because the previous night didn't end with it. In some old Japanese merchant households, the morning opening of the shop was paired with the evening closing. The two rituals were understood as connected. What you did at the end of one day was preparation for the beginning of the next. The ledger was closed at night and opened at dawn with the same deliberateness, not as ceremony, as a form of financial respect. This pairing, the evening close and the morning open, created a rhythm. And rhythm in financial life, as in everything else, is one of the most underrated forces. Irregular people make irregular financial decisions. People who have rhythm, who have daily touch points with their financial reality, develop a consistency of judgment that looks from the outside like extraordinary discipline. From the inside, it feels like nothing more than habit. The habit begins at night. It begins with the moment most people spend looking at their phone before they close their eyes. It would be wrong to leave this without saying the thing that old prosperity traditions kept returning to. The thing they feared most was not poverty, not bad luck, not unexpected loss. It was unconsciousness. The household that did not know what it had, what it spent, where things stood, that household was considered to be in a fundamentally vulnerable position, not because knowledge alone created wealth, but because ignorance, the slow, comfortable ignorance of someone who prefers not to look closely, was seen as an invitation to loss. The nighttime practice was, at its most fundamental level, a practice against unconsciousness. It said, "I will not close my eyes without knowing where I stand. I will not let the day end without a moment of clear seeing. I will not allow comfort or exhaustion or distraction to replace the small discipline of awareness." Old families who maintained this practice across generations did not speak about it with drama. It was simply what you did, like locking the door, like clearing the table, like saying goodnight. The fact that it encoded something far deeper, a philosophy of financial character, a relationship with prosperity built on attention rather than hope, was not always spoken aloud. It was understood, passed on, preserved. Before you sleep tonight, take 10 minutes. Close your financial day, not with worry, with awareness. Know what happened. Tend to your wallet as if it matters, because what you treat as if it matters becomes something you protect. Remove financial documents from the room where you rest. Place your mind where it belongs at the end of the day, in a state of deliberate, clear-eyed stillness. This is not complicated. It is not mystical. But it is old, and it is consistent across too many cultures and too many generations to be accidental. The families who guarded their prosperity longest were not always the wealthiest by birth. Many of them were quite ordinary. What set them apart was the quality of the habits they maintained when no one was watching, including the ones they performed quietly, alone, at the end of every day. That kind of discipline is not dramatic. It rarely shows up on the surface, but underneath, it holds everything together.